In this video you will learn 15 terms a project manager must know. It won't be a random set of terms taken from a book on project management. I have selected terms that my colleagues, project managers, use all the time at work. For sure you'll encounter these terms on a job interview for a role of the project manager. Hello, I'm Dmitry from Project Management Basics, and I help people just like you to become a project manager. If you want to become a PM, you're in the right place. Subscribe to this channel now. And the term number one is project charter. I know many companies do not use project charter to initiate a project. Nevertheless, in the minds of project managers, this term has transformed. You may not need a formal document, but you do want to have the vital information it contains. A project charter is a document that contains high-level information about project and its boundaries. Also, it gives an authority to a project manager to spend resources to reach project objectives. At least you need to capture project goal, project business case, high-level requirements, scope, budget, deadline, milestones, assumptions, and risks. Ideally, sponsors or customers should give a sign-off on the project charter. Second term is stakeholders. A stakeholder is a person or a group of people who can impact the project or can be impacted by the results of your work. We are talking about positive and negative impact here. For sure, people who pay for the project and people who will benefit from the project results are your key stakeholders. But there are dramatically more stakeholders even on a smaller project. All your team members are stakeholders, and some of them are key ones. Subject matter experts in your company and outside of it are also stakeholders. Your boss, your end users, executives who initiated the project. So the list is long. You need to develop a broader look on the project stakeholders. And there is a crucial reason to do it. Let's talk about it right now. That's why we need to talk about the third term, project requirements. Project requirements are the traits, capabilities and characteristics of the final product, service or result. That's quite simple, but why it's so important? You need to understand that project requirements do not come only from customers and clients. All stakeholders provide requirements to the project. Some of the requirements are related to the final product you need to deliver. Some of them are requirements to the processes and tools you need to use. In other words, requirements to your project management approach. Other stakeholders, like CEO of your company, will require you to communicate with clients in a certain way. Here's the main takeaway for you. If you miss to identify key stakeholders, you will miss to identify key requirements. However, sooner or later these requirements will appear. It will be the scope of work or risks that you didn't anticipate. The follow-up term is requirements traceability metrics. It's a tool that helps you to tie together project goal, requirements, stakeholders and major deliverables in one place. Usually it's a simple spreadsheet that lists all of this information. It also helps you to identify conflicting requirements or requirements that should not be a part of the project because they don't support any project goal. Okay, now let's talk about the triple constraint. A project triple constraint is a concept that states that scope of work is the function of time and costs. It means that the more you want to do, the more you need to pay and the more time to allocate. Likewise, you can trade money for time. Pay more to finish the project faster. You need to keep this triangle always in mind. On a project, nothing is free of charge. Moreover, when there is a change request on a project, you don't have much options here. You need to make a trade-off of scope, costs or time. With that said, what is the project scope? The scope or scope of work is the actual work that you and your team need to perform to create project deliverables and reach project objectives. So it can be mental work or physical labor or your management efforts. You are always interested in identifying 100% of the scope of work for the given project. Also, you need to understand that project scope strongly depends on the project goal and project requirements. So for example, you may need to create a website as a project result, but as you understand, it might be a social network like Facebook or a simple blog like mine. And even Facebook and Twitter will have different goals and requirements and therefore different scope of work. Next, we need to talk about the work breakdown structure. You need to identify 100% of project scope. Work breakdown structure, or WBS, helps you to do it. It's a simple tool with serious underlying concepts and principles. It shows the decomposition of project work. You start from the top where you have the final product, service or result. Then you break it down into major pieces. Then you break down each piece further into smaller pieces of work. You continue until you get pieces small enough to estimate and manage. Here's the trick. You take your smallest pieces and break them down into actual tasks that people will do to create this piece of the project work. You estimate these tasks to get the most accurate schedule and budget. So now we must talk about deliverables. A deliverable is a tangible or intangible results required to reach project objectives. So as you saw, these pieces of work breakdown structure are called deliverables. And there is a critical project management approach. You always need to work towards creating deliverables. It's that simple. First you identify project deliverables, then you ensure that each person on your team performs tasks aimed only to deliver certain deliverables. You can also improve this approach by focusing only on 1 or 2 deliverables at a time. This way you can show your progress to stakeholders often, you can get feedback from them, your team always knows what to do and what's the focus of the project. By the way, keep in mind that putting all pieces together is also a deliverable. You need to hand off your project results as a whole. The next term is project milestone. It's simply a set of critical dates on a project. You need to understand that you need milestones more than any other stakeholders. Ideally, your milestones are the dates when you show finished deliverables to your clients, including the final project result. So here's how it works now. You work towards creating a deliverable, and you try to finish this piece of work by the milestone date. This way, you make your project more manageable and more predictable. You are kind of doing small sub-projects. However, you do need to take a look on a big picture of the project from time to time. And also, you need to think several steps ahead to ensure you streamline the work of your team. Now, let's discuss baselines. There are 3 project baselines: scope, cost, and schedule baseline. A baseline is simply an approved version of the project scope, budget, or schedule. For example, scope baseline consists of project scope statement, work breakdown structure, and WBS dictionary. At some point you will get draft versions of these documents. They will seem pretty realistic to you. You'll feel like you identified 100% of all the work. Then you show these drafts to clients and they approve them. That's how you get a baseline of scope. Again, you as a project manager need these baselines more than clients do. You see, based on the scope baseline, you will do estimates of costs and time. So you'll estimate only the work that is in the scope baseline. Now, if anything changes in the scope baseline, it's a valid reason for you to make changes in the schedule or costs. Also, if a client wants to add something to the project, you can increase budget or move the deadline. Next, you need to know and understand project management process. Project management process is a high-level concept that shows how to make your project management efforts structured. So, to manage a project from start to an end, you need to make 5 steps. Project Management Institute calls these steps process groups. They are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing process groups. The most important thing you need to remember is that it's your responsibility to fill these groups with appropriate processes, tools, and workflows for the given project. Don't worry, usually you don't do it from scratch. A company that does projects has some common set of such processes. But don't confuse the project management process with the project lifecycle. Project lifecycle is a set of phases that a project should live through to get to the project goal. Each project has its unique life cycle to some extent, but within one industry there are best practices and you'll only use one or two life cycles in general. The main confusion happens in understanding life cycle of a small project versus a large project. On a small project, all phases happen almost at once. Therefore, it looks like it's just one single mess of activities. On a large project, phases are longer and more complex. They do look like sub-projects, even if they overlap. That's why when you run a small project, you usually think in terms of one project management process. On large project, you have a different project management process for each phase. Okay, the next term is escalation. Escalation is a communication technique that you use to solve a problem that is beyond your level of authority. It usually involves your leadership. By nature, a project manager doesn't have enough authority to rule out all the decisions. So escalation is a normal process that you should not be afraid of. But for sure, you need to do it in the most efficient manner for your leadership. Also, keep in mind that escalation is often a suitable answer for an interview question for the role of a junior project manager. Okay, number 14 is risk mitigation strategy. Okay, in 2019, a project manager must know that risk management is important. A risk mitigation strategy is your action plan to deal with a risk. But there is one important thing that many PMs miss. You develop a risk mitigation plan for a specific risk. Yes, there are cases when one mitigation strategy can impact other risks as well. But in any case, you need to track them separately because the effect of your mitigation strategy may be different for each different risk. Likewise, if you allocated risk reserves for a specific risk, you should not use this reserve for other risks or to cover up your delays. If a risk doesn't happen, release the reserves. Okay, we'll end up with the risk reserves. These are just your reserves of time, money, or resources to tackle a risk if it happens or to overcome it proactively. Do not treat your risk reserves as a pool of extra resources that you can use at your discretion to keep the project on track. Otherwise, you'll quickly lose control. A risk reserve is dedicated for a specific risk. It should be clearly shown in your project management plan. Okay, if you like this video and it's time for you to become a project manager, subscribe to this channel. Also, do check the additional resources in the description below. But before we go, do me a favor and write in the comments below. What other terms do you think are critical for a project manager to know? Thanks in advance, see you in the next video.